Rules of Attraction. She writes a regular advice column for Auxiliary magazine and maintains her blog at ardenleigh.typepad.com. She is currently at work on a memoir of her experiences in the BDSM community. Her band, Arden and the Wolves, has released 2 EPs.
Hi, everyone. Since I've been here this morning, I've somehow gotten the impression that this conference is centered around technology, right? So it might seem strange to you at first that I'm here to talk to you about relationships, because relationships are full of messy things like feelings and vulnerability, whereas technology seeks to streamline and simplify our lives so that we may avoid messes as much as possible. Unfortunately, however, if you look to both your left and right, you will see that this room, and indeed the entire world around you, is full of other people. And none of them, to my knowledge, comes with an instruction manual. Most human beings will spend more hours of their lives studying calculus than studying how to intentionally be in a relationship with someone they love. The vast majority of us will spend most of our lives in and out of relationships, and yet in the name of serendipity we figure, we'll wing it. If we were talking about our careers or our companies or even our educations, we know that that would spell disaster. So what if I told you that there was a way to streamline and systematize your approach to your interactions with other people in order to optimize your relationships for the best results possible? And what if I told you that you could do this with authenticity and sincerity? When I was 8 years old, I came home from school and I told my mom that it had been the best day of my life because I had discovered matrix logic. So it's pretty safe to assume that I am left-brained. Unfortunately, as I got older, my skills for analysis, while keeping me at the top of my class, weren't handy for finding things like a prom date. Or so I thought at the time. Anyone relate? When I tell people today that I'm a seduction coach, I often hear the reply, oh, well, that must not be too difficult for you, which, while I understand that that's supposed to be a compliment, is actually the opposite because they're still devaluing my work based on my appearance. But let me reassure you that despite the woman you see standing before you today, I didn't have a boyfriend or even lose my virginity until I was 22 years old. Actually, I was 22 and a half, because when you are a virgin at 22, you are counting every month. It was a few years after that that I came across the art of seduction, and with it the pickup artist community. Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things that I do not condone about the pickup artist community. But what fascinated me about this group of men was that they were coming together as a community to collectively acquire and hone a skill set in order to better their chances with the opposite sex. And meanwhile, as a woman, I was being told that the reason for my loneliness was that men love bitches, and he just wasn't that into me. And I thought, all right, two can play this game, pun intended. And I set about learning the art of seduction. I got certified in NLP, Ericksonian hypnosis, Tantra. I studied brand marketing and evolutionary biology, and I read every study that I could get my hands on as to what makes relationships successful. So what I'm here to give you today are 5 tactics for how you can use the art of seduction to create better relationships. And if getting into a great relationship doesn't seem like a convincing enough end in and of itself, I'll just point you to a 2014 study out of Washington University that said that people who have a supportive partner are also more likely to be promoted at work. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you today is about seductive persona. Seduction begins long before you enter the bedroom. It begins even before you meet someone that you decide to set your sights on. Seduction begins when you look in the mirror. Many people will debate the extent to which looks matter, but what does matter about your appearance is how it expresses to the rest of the world who you are and what you believe in. When you consciously create an authentic seductive persona, what you're doing is creating an arresting visual shorthand for the values and passions that are important to you, and that image that you project is going to determine what kind of people are going to be attracted to you when you're out in the world. Your external marketing must match your internal product. This might sound obvious to a lot of us here, but how many of us end up shuffled around by the world around us and by our social circles, and especially by our work? Not only do we become the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, but we end up filling our wardrobes with clothing that we bought because it was work appropriate. And soon we're reaching for the same khakis and twin sweater sets even when we're not at work. And our erotic selves get lost in a sea of business casual, or conversely, by the social influence of our subcultures. Finding your seductive persona is often a matter of looking to the stories and the idols that inspire you. So when I coach people, I ask them, who were your idols growing up? Or what were the stories, the films that inspired you when it came to romance as you were, coming of age? Because often that's where we're going to find the clues to the stories that we want to create in our own lives. Most often it's just a matter of giving ourselves permission to become the people that we want to be. So we may have started out in our lives as Brian Matthew Sevillas and Heather Renee Sweets, but it's up to us throughout the course of our lives to become James Deans and Dita Von Teeses. Please people, become more James Deans, because there's only one of him and he's kind of oversaturated. Dita Von Teese actually was quoted in a study, she was quoted in an interview with Elle magazine several years ago, and she told a story about a fan who came up to her after one of her shows and said to her, you're actually not that pretty. To which she replied, I know, isn't that great? Sex goddesses are made, not born. Contrary to the generalized advice we find in those magazines telling us how to be sexy by telling us which lipstick to buy or which 50 moves to make in bed, there are infinite number of ways to be seductive. So it's up to us to create the opportunity to create our own unique, individualized path. After all, if we all did things the same way, we would all be boring, which would be highly unseductive. So my advice to people is remember that be yourself is great dating advice, as long as you remember that your true self may be hiding under a layer of fear or 2 or 20. The second thing we can learn from seduction is how to make a proactive approach. As I mentioned earlier, when I was on my quest for relationship advice in my late teens and early 20s, all the popular literature that was on bookshelves at the time was telling me that if I approached someone, then I was needy and desperate, so that if I wanted to follow the rules, I had to just sit on my bar stool and wait for a nice man to come over and talk to me. And if the man I was interested in didn't come over and approach me, then he just wasn't that into me, and I should just move on. Don't call, don't text, don't stay on the phone longer than 10 minutes, don't be available when he calls, just be busy, just even busier than that. I was like, this is ridiculous. Am I supposed to get a great boyfriend just by sitting still? Sitting still didn't work for me, so I tried proactively approaching and starting conversations with the people that I was interested in and creating common ground based on our mutual interests, our shared passions. And the most remarkable things started happening. Not only did I start creating these amazing new friendships and relationships, but the people I approached started thanking me for doing so. Rather than seeing me as desperate or needy, they often said to me, I'm so glad you came over and said hello. You made my night. I never would have had the guts to come and approach you on my own. To be proactive in our relationships is to be generous with the people that we care about, because rejection is scary. And what the seducer does is the seducer makes all the crucial first moves in order to shoulder that burden of rejection and create a safe space for their target to enjoy connection and intimacy. In 2013, Time magazine published a study of over 2,000 couples surveyed to determine which factors were the best predictors of overall relationship satisfaction. And what they found was that one of the most consistent predictors of relationship success, second only to that fundamental colossus, communication, was knowledge of one's partner. A knowledge of one's partner meant anything and everything from knowing your lover's goals and dreams to knowing their favorite pizza toppings. It is often said that to be in love is to obsess over the minutia of another person. A seducer pays attention to detail when looking at his or her target because they want to know which moves are going to go over best, which variables, when put into the equation, will result in the most favorable outcomes. And sometimes these details are logistical. For example, it's handy if you're out at a bar to know whether the person you're interested in has promised their friend a ride home that night before deciding whether to try and get them alone or simply get their phone number to set up a date for a later time. But often these details are personal. Things like what motivates them and inspires them, what activities they enjoy, and what books and films spoke to them as they were growing up so that you can tailor your adventures with them accordingly. I can't be the only one. Hint, hint. Seducers are often decried as being calculating, but remember that calculating is merely the evil twin of considerate. And when you pay attention to what makes someone tick, you create this amazing space for intimacy to happen where both you and your partner can see and be seen. At its essence, seduction is an act of generosity about what the other person wants. Even the crudest of pickup tactics is at least designed with thinking of how its recipient is going to respond. One of the great contradictions of love relationships is that we expect them to provide both excitement as well as security, intimacy as well as mystery. And while knowledge of one's partner was the second best predictor of relationship success, other studies have also shown that it is uncertainty and even a little bit of danger that sustains attraction. In 1974, researchers Donald Dutton and Arthur Aaron conducted a study where they had a female surveyor stop male passersby on one of two bridges. The first bridge was sturdy and stable, and the second bridge was rickety and dangerous. You know where I'm going with this, right? Overwhelmingly, the men who were surveyed responded that they reported more attraction to the woman who interviewed them on the more dangerous bridge. Why is that? Well, the science behind that points to the fact that exciting experiences spike our levels of dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that is responsible for incentive salience, or the seeking out of pleasure. And what happens is that we come to associate our state of arousal with the person who is present with us. So this is why dating coaches basically say that for a first date, you should choose something with a stimulating physical activity, such as, roller coasters or a laser tag. Or at the very least, if you're going to see a movie, at least make it an exciting one, a scary one. It would be a deterrent to intimacy to try and be mysterious about who you are, but it can be a great catalyst to intimacy to be mysterious about what it is that you plan to do. So for example, you can text them on your next date night with an unknown address and instructions on what to wear, or take them to that new restaurant that they'd mentioned wanting to try just when they think that you'd forgotten that they'd said anything about it. When you promise your lover a surprise, you light up those parts of their brain that are responsible for anticipation and pleasure, and you continue to keep them on their toes in a way that's fun and engaging and healthy and contributes to sustaining attraction over time. Seduction for me has always been a philosophy of experience curation. By continuing to craft new and exciting ventures for my partners, I am literally training their brains to associate me with pleasure. They're like Pavlov's dog, hearing the bell ring and knowing that they're going to get fed. My lovers seem to instinctively know that when I show up, it's likely that they're going to have a good time, because I'm creating that exciting experience and I'm anchoring it to my presence. I am literally creating dopamine addictions in their brains. Please use this ethically. If that's the one thing that you take away, that's the crux of my work, is I continue to create pleasure and I anchor it to myself. And the only people I can't seduce are the people who don't like pleasure, and you'd be surprised. When we enter a relationship, there is always a trade-off. We may lose certain freedoms. We're now accountable to another person. But in return, we gain their companionship and the comfort and pleasure that comes with that. A seducer is always aware that in order to rightfully maintain his or her place of importance in another person's life, that person must be gaining more value out of having them in their life than not. attempting to solidify the relationship merely by making it inconvenient for your partner to leave you is a Pyrrhic victory. So doing things like trying to solidify your relationship by publicizing on social media or just leaving a whole bunch of crap on your partner's bathroom sink is to sell out for a short-term gain. Instead, keep evaluating the relationship and looking into ways that you can continue to make it more and more a source of happiness and fulfillment for the both of you. And finally, remember, give your partners the opportunity to mirror this behavior for you in return. When you start creating positive, pleasurable experiences for someone, you know, it's easy for them to, it's easy for like a one-way dynamic to start showing up. And where you're really going to narrow down to the partners who are right for you is when you find that person who starts mirroring your behavior. I'm fine with initiating things, but you need to see them reciprocated at some point. And just like it's advisable to accept a cup of coffee from a job interviewer who offers it to you so that on some unconscious level they feel that they're investing in you, you should allow your partners to take care of you as well. And if they're not as skilled at it as you are, which if you study this is kind of an occupational hazard, just remember to help them out and tell them the things that you like and give them the opportunity to make you happy. The need for intimacy is a thing from which no one escapes. Our urge to connect with our fellow human beings is literally encoded into our genetics. It is key to our survival. It's in our brains from back in the ages when without it, we'd have risked ostracism from our tribes and thereby isolation and certain death. We are programmed to survive and further the species. And in order to do both of those things, we need to connect. We need to relate. No one is exempt from that. What the seducer does that is such an act of generosity is to offer the gift of intimacy and connection while shouldering the possible burden of rejection for his or her target. So don't let anyone taint your mind against the power of seduction. Used with ethics and integrity, it can be the greatest gift that one can possibly give. Because at the end of the day, we all want to experience passion and connection. And it is a great relief to have the brunt of the work done for us by someone else. Thank you. There's time. I'm totally open to Q&A. Technology. I have an iPhone. Yes. Sure, that's a great question. I always make sure that my actions align with my intentions, and I'm generally upfront about what it is that I want. I guess sometimes you don't really know what you want until you explore something with a person, but I think you can kind of be upfront about that too. There we go. Basically, I just stay true to my integrity. I try to stay honest. I don't lie, and I try to leave people better than I found them, you know? I think actually when you consciously study the art of seduction, you actually end up being better to people than people who don't because you're aware of it. You're incredibly aware of it. And for me, especially as someone who's made this my career, I know that if something goes wrong and something blows up, I am not going to look like the innocent one, you know? I've had guys who, one of the things that I mentioned in my book, I have an anecdote, and I have a book, by the way, you guys, it's called The New Rules of Attraction, and I didn't bring any copies with me today, but I forgot, but it's on Amazon, so if you like me, go buy it. But I have a story in my book where basically this guy who was kind of a notorious womanizer, and I kind of knew that about him, you know, but I was like, all right, but he's cute. Like, maybe let me put my hand near the flame. Let's see what I can do here. But really, I think he ended up seducing me in the end. And then it turned out that he had this like on and off girlfriend who, they were not quite off enough that she was going to be happy about the fact that he'd been with me. And despite the fact that he was this notorious seducer, you know, she kind of came out and tried to say, oh, Arden Leigh seduced my boyfriend. I was like, no, I sat with her at 4 a.m. at a diner and it was like, dude, I had no idea. His Facebook said it's complicated. I'm sorry. Like, I wish I could take it back. And also, I didn't want to sleep with a guy who had a girlfriend. Like, I know you have it worse, but this is no picnic for me. But everybody in the scene was like, oh, Arden Leigh's an evil seducer. So if anything, I am more conscious of that because my reputation is at stake much more than other people. Other people have relationship drama and, all kind of crap that goes down, and it's just normal. It's just human. It's just what we do. But for me, like, that gets scrutinized. So if anything, seduction has made me than I was before. Anyone else? Sure, there are differences. I didn't decide to cover them today. I wanted to give a talk that was gender neutral, orientation neutral, and every possible sense. Yeah, there are definitely differences in the attraction switches. Evolutionary biology pares it down to this really reductive thing, which is like, oh, men want a woman who, is young and fertile looking and has like a waist to hip ratio or whatever, whereas women want men who, have like status or power or, and that's really reductive. I'm not going to say it's inaccurate, but it's definitely simplistic. You can kind of look at that as a jumping off point, but for sure, Mystery, who created the mystery method, which is one of the things I studied when I started studying pickup, said that the 5 attraction switches that women are attracted to in men are leader of men, protector of loved ones, successful risk taker, willingness to emote, and I don't remember the 5th one, but it'll come to me. But yeah, that idea of being someone who is in power, at least within his social circle, as a leader, as someone that other people look up to. Oh, pre-selection. Pre-selection being, are there already other women who are interested in him? Because that's kind of like, as a woman, if you have to go around and interview every single dude to make sure that he's not a creep or a rapist, that's going to take a lot of your time. So if you see a guy who is surrounded by other women, at the very least, you're like, oh, even if they're only friends, at least they can vouch for this guy not being creepy and scary. What I've found, man, it's like I wish I could reduce what men are attracted to down to 5 attraction switches. I should be, as a coach, as doing the work that I do, I should be able to do that. But so much of my own philosophy is about paying attention to more things like whether someone is an introvert or an extrovert, whether someone is an Epicurean or an ascetic. That's gonna affect the kind of, am I gonna cook dinner for that person, or am I gonna say let's go to a yoga class or whatever? Like, that's gonna affect the kinds of things that, overall. I think there are certain, certainly the way that I've chosen to brand myself as a woman and also as a coach, and kind of everything, all these gears working together as one thing, is that men understand when and it's weird because then I get these weird things where people who just know me on Facebook feel like they have like a relationship with me, because they feel like they know me intimately because I blog and whatever, but I write so much stuff about releasing shame around sex and like creating space for all of our taboos to be okay, that there are a lot of guys who find themselves drawn to me because they're like, oh my God, you get it, and I can tell you all this stuff about my dark side that I've never told anyone before, and you can hold that and you're not going to judge me for it. And I think that's really, honestly, like, it's important to me in my work. It's also a bit of an occupational hazard because it does get to this point where people come up to me and they think that they know me because they feel that I know them so well, even though I've never met them. But I would say that if you're a woman who is looking to go into this work, then one of the foundations, like the very cornerstone, is not to not to judge men for the way that all the sexual shame that is put on men in society and stuff like that. You know, it's interesting. It's like there's this whole thing going around now about how like porn is not realistic, and it's true on some levels. Like the stuff that you're seeing in porn is like you don't see the warm up and the practice, and you don't see all the lube that goes into it beforehand, and here's these people with perfect airbrushed bodies and whatever. But we've gone so far down that line of the campaign of like, oh, porn is unrealistic, that I feel like we're getting to the point where we're shaming people who watch porn, which the majority of that is men. We're getting to the point where we're shaming people who watch porn for having unrealistic fantasies. And I want to be like, no, 98% of the stuff that you see in porn is stuff you can learn to do safely with a consenting partner. It's not going to look the same way, but you can learn to do that. It's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with your fantasies just because you saw them in a porn. And what's interesting now is now it's happening to women too. And I saw it actually, I got into a debate on Twitter the other day, and I jumped into a conversation that someone else retweeted, and they ended up like getting really mad at me and calling me a they're like, oh, submissive women these days, like all their fantasies are just so unrealistic, you know? And I was like, yeah, so are yours, buddy. Like, look at porn, you know? But now people are coming out with women and being like, oh, 50 Shades, like, no billionaire is gonna come and swoop you up and blah, blah, blah. And of course not, like, duh, but we can still do, I mean, why would you want to do the things you read in 50 Shades? They're all boring. But you can still have a DS relationship. Like, you can do that. Like, there's nobody stopping you. It's not going to look the same. It probably won't be with a billionaire unless, I don't know, read my book and meet one. But, just saying. But you can still do all those things, and there doesn't need to be that shame around it. And honestly, like, I'd say even as a guy, if you're a guy who can give women permission to explore without sexual shame, it's hard to pull that off, because so often you end up looking at like one of those like conscious men who's like, here, let me be your sexuality Sherpa before you find the one. I vetted thousands of women, and you will be one of like what? It's a little harder to do that. But yeah, at the foundation, I think, is really like making sure that you're looking at someone and having that really unconditional acceptance for them and whatever they're into. It doesn't mean that you have to do it with them. It just means that you're a safe space for them to listen and be themselves. And you know, that's huge. Like how many, you know, I was a pro dom for years, and it's like how many guys, like I bankrolled on the fact that there were so many men out there who couldn't tell their wives that they wanted to, you know, whatever, you know. And it's like, I mean, my bank account thanked all of y'all, but like that's awful. Like that's our idea of relationships these days is like, oh, I'm going to get into this, you know, legitimate relationship, but secretly I want to do this porn stuff. But I can't tell the mother of my children that because, oh, she'll judge me for it, and I'm a bad person for even thinking those kind of thoughts about her or whatever. So then I'm going to go off to the strip club, and then I'm going to do this. And it's, you know, the divide between our legitimate relationships, what we think of as legitimate relationships, and our dark sides, our sexual taboos, is really sad. If there's one thing I could change in our culture, I'd be like, you guys, we all have sex. Like, for every one of us in this room, 2 people had to fuck for us to get here. We're all having it. It's a thing. So talk about it. Thank you, guys.